Hey family and anybody else watching, and welcome back to As For Me in My House. Today we are going to Joshua 4, 5, and 6. Goes out to you today, Troy. We are continuing where we left off. Yesterday was that handoff to Joshua, son of Nun. We also looked at the discussion between Rahab and the spies, and Rahab saying all these people here in Jericho are terrified of you. Beyond that, we looked at the actual crossing of the Jordan. Now today that's where we're picking up, is they've just finished crossing the Jordan, and they're already going to be setting up memorial stones so that they remember the crossing of the Jordan. So very cool there. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the circumcision of the people again at Gilgal, and then the actual fall of Jericho. And we'll talk about that briefly because, man, I've been excited about this one, talking about this one for a while. It's cool. It's a really, really cool story. So we'll talk about it. But again, Joshua 4, 5, and 6 today. So chapter 4. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests stood, and to carry them over with you, and to put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of tribes of the Israelites to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Now, the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side, while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed in front of the Israelites, as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. That day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him all the days of his life, just as they had revered Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." And the priests came up out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal, on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their fathers, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan just what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God." Chapter 5. Now, when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath Harloth. Now, this is why he did so. All those who came up out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the desert on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the desert during the journey from Egypt had not. The Israelites had moved about in the desert 40 years, until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land that he had solemnly promised to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised, because they had not been circumcised on the way, and after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in the camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate of the produce of Canaan. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as a commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down on the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Chapter 6. Now, Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in." So Joshua son of Nun called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered the people, "Advance, march around the city, with armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpet, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the people, "Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout." So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the people returned to camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the 7 priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests, carrying the 7 trumpets, went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to camp. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you this city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron that are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury." When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted. And at the shout of the trumpet, when the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so that every man charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, Go into the prostitute's house, and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, because she had hid the men Joshua sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. At that time Joshua pronounced this solemn oath: "Cursed before the Lord is the man who undertakes to rebuild the city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest will he set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. First of all, I think that's really chapter 6:26 there, where Joshua is pronouncing that oath. It has this note here: Joshua's curse was fulfilled, literally, when a man attempted to rebuild the city of Jericho in the days of King Ahab. And that's in 1 Kings 16:34. See if I can't remember that when we get there, because I think that that's so cool. Yes, that may be a long time in coming, but that doesn't mean the word of God fails. Absolutely not. But what I think is interesting is this fall of Jericho. And I've always thought about it as, I don't know, as either the Veggie Tales or the kids' songs, or just, oh yeah, they marched around the city and the walls fell and they took the city for the Lord. But I think that when we look at the fear of the Lord and how important that is, we see that in 4 verse 24. This is talking about crossing over the Jordan. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful. And so you, Israelites, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. When talking about the fear of the Lord, I know, Troy, you and I have talked about this, how there's a fear and there's a reverence, and how important that is. And I see that in your life, and I love that. And I'm so incredibly thankful for that. Because when we see this picture of Jericho, it's so easy to remember those kids' stories that we heard. But I had to this is just a quick writing down of what I knew, or of what I wanted to mention about the power and the fear of God, because it is daunting. So these are the Israelites. These are the same people. These are what people are in Jericho are saying. Rahab has mentioned that people, the fear of God has fallen on you people. We know how God's with you. Well, how do they know God is with them? Well, these are God's people. By God's power, they escaped and plundered Egypt. God made them favorable in the eyes of the Egyptians. So they plundered the Egyptians for wealth. So they escaped and ransacked Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. They survived the desert. I don't know if people know about this, but I'm sure rumor got out that these people are fed by some random food from heaven. This mysterious people, these same people that escaped Egypt and got all their gold, crossed the ocean. Their God stopped the water. They crossed the ocean, or the Red Sea. Then they're eating this food from heaven. Apparently there's this mysterious food that they're eating, and there's a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke, depending on night or day. Beyond that, they survived the desert. They defeated those giant kings, Og and Sihon. Now they've crossed the Jordan. And now, only now, have they come to us. The people that are before us, that are outside our city walls, that's those people. Their God has done all that through these people. So that's terrifying. That's terrifying. And then they have this armed guard march with the Ark of the Covenant around the city. And Joshua tells the people to not shout yet. This is just the first day, right? So they do this for 6 days and then shout on the seventh. So I couldn't really tell if the people are marching with them or not. I always think the people are marching, I think. But this is the Ark of the Covenant and that armed guard that's going around at least. So that happens, and they're shouting trumpets the whole time. That's a little, or I mean, they're blowing trumpets. So that's a little creepy, but definitely terrifying. And then it happens, so Monday, we'll say, happens Monday. And then it happens Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. And by the time you get to that seventh day and they finish that first lap, at least, hey, this has been going on a week. We hate it. It's uncomfortable. They finish that first lap, and I can't imagine the terror when they start a second lap and something's changed. These are the people of the God that has done all of that. They are here in front of us, and they're at our doorstep, and you have to be living every day in utter terror and fear. And then they start that second lap, and they start marching around the city. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it, because it shows what God, the fear of God in these people. And the Israelites shout. They shout. That's it. They're being obedient to God, absolutely. But it's God that brings down those walls. And that is why that fear of the Lord is justified, because he has done everything for these people. They couldn't escape Egypt on their own. They obviously couldn't cross the Red Sea on their own. They couldn't survive in the desert. It even says that your sandals and your clothes didn't wear out in the desert. He fed them. He kept them alive, away from diseases. All of this stuff led them through with a pillar of fire and smoke. and then led them again across the Jordan, and they've done all this. It's that God that we serve and that we worship. And it's that God that we fear, that we have a great sense of respect for, but it makes sense. They are right. His people are right to fear them, to revere and to love, to consider perfectly holy the name of that God. And that's who we serve in Jesus. And so I'm so thankful, Troy, that you have that love and that conviction in your heart, that fear of God. I'm so thankful for you for having somebody at work like that I can rely on as a peer and as a brother that I love dearly. So yeah, worth praying about. So let's do it. My God, I thank you that you protect your people, that you provide for your people, that you guide your people, Lord, that you love your people so dearly that you save them from an infinite number of calamities, Lord. God, even today, though we may not eat manna directly from heaven, Lord, it's you that provide the jobs for us, that provide finances so we can go out and buy food. God, it's you that provides everything for us. And you've already provided everything through your Son. My God, I thank you so much for all the provision that you have given us. And I thank you for dear friends like Troy that make work bearable, that challenge us in our faith, that give us insight and love and hope, God. Thank you so much for him, God, and I thank you infinitely more for your Son, Jesus. And it's in his name I pray. Amen. Well, Troy, I love you tons. Holy moly. For anyone else watching, know that I appreciate you so much as well, and I will plan on seeing you tomorrow. Have a good one.